It's a wonderful day for you to watch the SMC Journal podcast, and that's what this is. This podcast is all about performance engineering in IT today. And that includes testing, monitoring, observability, anything that revolves around making applications, software, hardware perform better and more efficiently. So I'm Scott Moore, your host, and this is going to be the start of a 4-part series that I'm doing on the fundamentals of load testing. That's right, we're going back to the basics for the next few days, or the next few episodes, I should say. And so I'm out running around the country right now on a performance tour, having meetups, but I still have a responsibility to bring you quality episodes of this podcast, and that's what I'm doing. And the reason I do that is because I have some great sponsors who make this show possible, including Micro Focus, and they are the makers of one of the biggest load testing tools that ever existed, LoadRunner Professional, LoadRunner Enterprise, LoadRunner Cloud, and LoadRunner Developer. Make sure you scan that QR code and check out the links that we have on our site for the smcjournal.com and on our YouTube notes for the episode. We've got links out there for the community, the LoadRunner family page where they feature performance engineering, and the YouTube playlist that they have where they discuss performance engineering using LoadRunner. And make sure you check out their community made up of the largest group of performance engineers in the world at community.microfocus.com. We're also sponsored by my friends at Keysight Technologies who own Eggplant Software. And Eggplant Performance is the performance piece of the Eggplant software that supports Citrix, web, API testing, and lower level TCP/IP-based applications. It features analysis and reporting, and it's a full-featured load testing tool, and you should make sure to check it out today. Make sure you either scan that QR code or go to Eggplant Software to find out more information. There is a community edition out there that you can download that gives you a certain number of web virtual users and a few Citrix virtual users that you can check out. And it's great that these are the two main sponsors, makers of load testing tools, because we're going to be talking about load testing for the next about 2 weeks, starting today. So with this episode, I'm going to start you out with what we used to call I'm talking the Mercury days, when everybody started using LoadRunner and we're enterprise load testing. There was always this chalk talk. It was the underground name for this presentation. And the person that I first learned it from in about 1998-99 was James Pulley. He was a Mercury employee at the time, and he was making rounds to some of the first Mercury partners, of which I worked for one of the first Mercury partners that had a whole arm, a division dedicated to WinRunner, LoadRunner, and those were the only two tools at the beginning, and then we expanded from there. But we really focused on performance testing more than anything. We were doing large SAP implementations. The company itself were an integrator of mainframe green screen technology, AS400s, and basically bringing them into the new world of the web. So this is the .com era when everything was going crazy. Everybody was being given all these stock options to join companies, and they're going to make the next, they're going to be the next millionaire, which very rarely ever happened anyway. But this particular company became one of the first official Mercury partners. We had a great relationship with them. This is not to talk about Mercury, but Micro Focus is basically an extension of Mercury. That's where LoadRunner came from. And so that's where a lot of my training come into play. That's the reason why I mention all of this. And that's the first time I ever heard of James Pulley. Was he came into town and he went over this chalk talk that he had made. And there was a Word document, I think, along the lines of maybe 3 pages. As a matter of fact, I'll try to find this and I'll try to post it in the show notes, or I'll post it, make sure somebody reminds me, or I'll forget to do it. But I have the original document that James Pulley reviewed with us on this. So what is the chalk talk? It basically is, we had to learn this as performance engineers when we would go into a customer, maybe we were doing some pre-sales. We were helping sales explain what performance testing was. And back then, everybody was trying to figure out, what is this automated load testing thing? What does it do? How can you explain in everyday terms what LoadRunner is actually trying to do? So we had to basically memorize this talk and basically say, this is how LoadRunner can replace the people and the things that you would use if you had to do this manually. So do people even do manual load testing? Not performance testing, not where you just test one user, you go out to GT metrics and get a site, but actually load test with 10, 15, 20 people. It still goes on. It still goes on. I do remember being in a company, and the very first load test I was actually part of was before this company ever purchased a load testing tool. Now, this is even before my consulting days and learning this chalk talk. I remember the days when the company I was with flew out 12 people to 12 different cities to test a distributed application on the WAN. I was sent to Houston, of all places. Other people went to LA, New York, Miami. You know, somebody wanted to go to Hawaii. I would have volunteered for that. I got to go to Houston. Love you, Houston, but come on, in July, right? So if you're not familiar with Houston, it's pretty hot there in the summertime and very humid. So I get to Houston, and all of my other colleagues at work have been given a sheet of paper, a document that's got some instructions it's basically a business process. We want you to log in with your name and password, hit enter, and do these other things in the application. Every person was going to have to do this. We were given a Excel spreadsheet template where we were going to key in times, and we were given a stopwatch. Kid you not, 12 stopwatches were purchased for this. So we all went out to these locations, and we're having a meeting, a conference call. No conference call software, by the way. It's all on the phone, so there's no visual there. And centrally, there is a server operator for the operating systems themselves and monitoring the infrastructure, the servers that are sitting in the data center. There is a project manager there, and then there's a person that represents the vendor of the software that we were testing. And this particular software was sort of an add-on to Excel. It was like, it took Excel and made it into a much more powerful tool, and it had a special database in the back end. I won't talk about who it was, but they're still around. This application was pretty hard to actually automate in LoadRunner at the time, but this was before we ever knew about it. So we get on the call, and the project manager with the server and server admin and the product person in the data center is calling out to everybody on the phone, and there's all the fans running in the data center. You can hardly hear what they're saying. Okay, everybody, I want you to listen up. We want you to get to the login screen, and we're going to give you 30 seconds to do that. Everybody gets to there, and it never failed, because there were all these people, you know, somebody's on mute, somebody's not, and they're all in different locations. Somebody in LA is going through an earthquake, it sounds like. Somebody in New York, there's a police siren going off. Miami, you can hear beach sounds for some reason. It sounds like white noise. You can tell where that person was. And they're like, okay, everybody log in with your login, and then hit tab, click the password, and click login. 3, 2, 1, enter. And you would hear a click from a keyboard. And then there would be this awkward pause, 5, 6 seconds, and somebody on the line would go, yeah, I missed that last cue. Have we started yet? I just walked in the room. I had to go to the restaurant. So it was always something. It's like, oh my gosh, so we had to keep redoing these over and over again. So, but we did it. And we timed the logins, and we timed the steps in the business process, and we wrote them all down. And we were there for like 2 days doing this testing. We all fly back. We all turn in our Excel spreadsheets. The project manager then goes through all these spreadsheets, all these timings, puts everything together, looks at the information, and they've got this external data that comes from the monitoring. In other words, somebody had been monitoring the Windows operating system, which is what it was running on, and was looking at CPU metrics, memory, and things like that. They put it all together, bring it to the head person in the company that's over this software deployment that's going to be rolled out to many, many different offices around the United States. It's satellite offices, basically. And we were put in these offices specifically because these were the ones who had most of the problems and most of the support calls at the time because of things being slow, and they kind of thought it might be a network issue. And they thought maybe they were pushing more stuff than they should have across the network. Make a long story even longer, after everything was compiled together, the report was given to the boss of the company, who then turned around and said, "This is great for 12 people. Now, I wonder what would happen if we had 50 people on the system concurrently." Now, you can literally hear the eyes of the project manager roll back into the back of the sockets of their head because they knew what that meant. Okay, and so immediately the thoughts that come are, okay, we need 50 college students in a room that we rent this number of PCs, we load up all the software, and we start doing this test again, and we're out there coordinating it, has somebody in the front of the room calling it out. We need 50 stopwatches. What's the cost of all of this? And at the end of our test, which involved very expensive plane tickets at the time, hotel rooms, 2 days worth of work by 12 different employees. I mean, you add this up, pretty expensive, and it's not repeatable whatsoever. It's not testing by any means, and it's not going to necessarily reduce the risk. And at the end of it, what do you have? And this is when somebody said, wait, maybe we should get a load testing tool to automate this, and that may solve our problem and not have to go to all these great lengths to do this test. And so that is where Mercury was brought in at the time, and LoadRunner was evaluated. And so this is where a vendor like Mercury, pre-sales technical person, would come in and explain to the company this chalk talk. So Mercury's partner was being educated, that their salespeople and their SEs and their engineers were being trained just like Mercury internally. And this is where Mr. Pulley comes in, and he goes around to the different partners and says, this is what we say to customers. Now I'm going to show you a slide here. This kind of represents the end result of the chalk talk. What we would start with is we would draw, physical stick figures or whatever that represent real people. On the left-hand side, we would have real people with real computers with those stopwatches, pens and papers for the scripts, and all these things. But in the right-hand side, it would pretty much be the same. It would be, say, a web page. It could be a desktop application. It could be whatever. And then we had physical servers that were sitting in a data center at the time. These could now be virtual servers. It could be containers. It could be whatever you want. But it is the system under test or the application under test. Now, doing all of this stuff manually, as you've seen, once you get over 2 or 3, it's pretty much useless anyway. You need a way to automate it and be able to run it the same way each time. Or if you're going to do randomization and you're going to create dynamic test, you control it. And that's what LoadRunner allowed us to do. So we replace those real people, those college students in a lab environment with 50 PCs with one computer that runs these 50 threads, if you will, virtual users against the system as if it were those 50 people, but using one computer, or basically it's 2 computers. It would be the controller who orchestrates this test, and then a generator that generates that load that takes instructions from that controller orchestrator. Now, this is how all load testing tools generally work, and they pretty much have modeled themselves after the original LoadRunner tool for the most part. They call it a controller, they may call it a generator, an injector, or something of that nature, but you generally have a way to control the test and have settings and behaviors on one side, and then you have something that takes direction from it and injects load onto a system under test, or what we might refer to as the application under test. Now, while this load is being generated, there is at least one thing happening. Load is being generated, but timings are being taken. And these timings are the stopwatch timings. In LoadRunner, it was so flexible because you could get the time, you could make whatever you want to be a timing. If there was one call that you wanted to time, you just timed that one thing. But if you wanted to time multiple calls to make up a bigger transaction, maybe your login was a combination of a single sign-on call and 2 other calls that got made to other servers. If you needed to include all of that together as one timing, it was just as easy as putting a marker here and a marker there, and you could get that timing. And that's what we were trying to do here. But if you just needed to make one API call and time that one thing, you could. In obviously the early days, when you had websites where you wanted to grab everything and you wanted all of these components together, the full web page, you were still doing it at a network layer. You weren't doing it at the browser level. Typically, if you were using a LoadRunner protocol like the web protocol, you were getting all of these requests and responses and timing those as they were executed. Now, if you needed to get the full browser, the full DOM, the full rendering, because there might be some heavy elements on that page, you would combine LoadRunner with WinRunner, or later on QuickTest Pro, that basically you would have one WinRunner or QuickTest Pro installation on one PC that was sitting next to your load generator hardware, and that would run what we would call a GUI virtual user. And that would load up the entire GUI and time the GUI renderings, and it would send a transaction timing that matched the LoadRunner API calls for transaction timings. And so you would see them interspersed, but you could also, in the analysis, you could split them out. You could say, my network layer, LoadRunner virtual users for the web are showing me this timing, but my GUI virtual user is showing me this timing. You didn't have to have like for a 500 virtual user test, you didn't have to have 500 GUI virtual users to get GUI timings. You could have one GUI virtual user for every 10 to 50 virtual users. So if you had a 500 user test, you might have 5 or 6 PCs that were running a GUI virtual user and giving you these timings throughout the test. You would get an average of those while you were generating the load from a network load. And that's what this is, that's what this load test tool is doing, is generating that load and grabbing those timings. Now, hopefully, we're doing something else at the same time. We are hopefully monitoring and grabbing in statistics about the system resources of that application under test from those servers. So you see that in this picture. We're basically, as the load is being generated, we are affecting the system resources. The CPU is probably getting higher. The memory is probably being used and slowly gives up. And if you've got memory leaks and you run out, you would want to know that. So in the beginning, people were grabbing this information separately, like in my manual load test example. This person was gathering all this stuff probably from Windows Performance Monitor, and they would look at that and throw it into some Excel spreadsheets, and then they would look at the timings from our stopwatches. Well, LoadRunner allowed you to monitor the servers at the same time you're injecting load and put those in a real-time graph, so you could see as the virtual users ramp up in this graph, and we reached 35 virtual users, all of a sudden we see the CPU climbing on each of the servers that we're monitoring. Maybe there's a web server, maybe there's an app server, and maybe there's a database server, and each one of those could be monitored for all these different types of resources: memory, disk, network, and other things, even at the application layer. Maybe the web server itself, we're giving statistics that we might want to look at. Later on with .NET, are there .NET CLR or Java, specific Java counters? So we could go deep or we could go wide. We didn't want to over-monitor, right? You don't want to skew the results because you're over-monitoring the system and causing the CPUs to work harder than they really should because they're having to also dole out these system monitoring information. But to be able to pull that in at the same time and cross the graphs that say, at this number of users, we see this transaction time breaching what we would now call our service level objective of 5 seconds. It's now 7 seconds. Now we've reached that, but why? Now we have another graph over here from that monitoring information that says, well, it's because the CPU has reached 100% on the database server and we've begun to queue. And once you begin to queue, everything just goes kind of through the roof. So why are we queuing? Well, it's because we're putting too much pressure on that database. Well, why? Well, we've missed 3 indexes and we're doing heavy searches here. Let's fix that. We call the database DBA. You hear on his keyboard, right? Try it again. Rerun the test. Boom. CPU's down. Being able to see it, that was a very powerful thing to do. And that's kind of what's taken us into today. I mean, it's been over 20-something years and we're still able to do this. Now, how often we do this and the cycle and the methodology that we use, it's pretty much the same, but it's more frequent. It should be continuous, and the cycle continues for smaller and smaller elements of that. And we want to do that as early as possible to get that feedback. But this is still fundamentally what we're trying to do. So it really all goes back to that initial chalk talk of replacing real users with virtual users, a bunch of hardware with a little bit of hardware in a load testing lab, executed against a system under test that hopefully is as close to what we expect to see in production as possible from a system resources perspective. What should we be able to get out of this automated load testing tool? We should be able to generate load, gather end user response timings, those stopwatch timings I'm talking about, and be able to also pull in system resource and other type of monitors where we can correlate this data and easily be able to see at this point in time, with this number of virtual users, here's what's going on with the system. And that's something that, quite frankly, LoadRunner has done very, very well. And they focused initially on a easy and extensive way to look at analysis. I would say whoever initially designed the analysis engine and the analysis reporting in LoadRunner, they were geniuses because they made it so easy to do that. I haven't seen a lot of other load testing products since then focus on analysis because they've been so focused on being able to generate the load, to create scripts or make scripting easier or get browser level timings and things like that. They're focused more on the creation of the test rather than the results of the test. And the only reason you create this test is because you want to get to the analysis so you can make a business decision on, well, what is the health of the system? Should we actually roll this out? And that's what a good load testing tool should be able to provide. So that kind of gets into the fundamentals of just, why are we even doing this? What are we trying to get out of it? But being able to pull all of that data together and easily see and being able to weed out the noise that you don't want to see in analysis, it's really key. So that's part one, is what is load testing all about? What is a load testing tool, automated load testing, supposed to achieve for you? And so if I had all the time in the world, I'd delve into stuff a little more deeper than I am today, or in any of these episodes you're going to see. Maybe I should create a course. This is the part where I would say, now, if you really want to get into it, then you should go to my course, and here's the link for that. I don't have a course. So maybe this is a good test for me to ask you, do you think I should have a course out there that goes into these types of fundamentals and then maybe goes into the various products that you can use, not just LoadRunner, but LoadRunner, NeoLoad, Eggplant Performance, JMeter, well, maybe even JMeter. But should I put this together? Keep watching this series of all 4 parts and then give me some feedback on what you think. And the way you can do that is to reach me through my website, my LinkedIn profile, or my Twitter handle. And there's the URL for LinkedIn, and my website is scottmoore.consulting. My email address is help@scottmoore.consulting. Would love to hear what you have to say about this. And I'd like to know, how did you start doing load testing? If maybe you're brand new at it, what tools are you using today? And is this what you're able to get out of an automated load testing solution that you're using right now? I'd love to know. Do you like this kind of content? If you do, then you should be a subscriber to the YouTube channel as well. There's a URL for it. And if you're already subscribed, I want to say thank you very much for getting us to these number of subscribers that we have today, because I'm always amazed at how many people are telling me, we like what you're doing, and it means a lot whenever I see that number going up, because I know people are getting something out of this and it's valuable to them. So if it is, continue to subscribe. So thank you so much for watching this episode. Look for me out on the road somewhere. This episode is going to air sometime in the time that I'm running around the country, around the early part of May. And this is I'm probably going to be somewhere in Tennessee or something, but just watch my LinkedIn feed and you'll see wherever I'm going to be. Would love to meet you in person. If you can make any of the meetups, just look for theperformancetour.com and see where I'm at. That page is always updated with the latest information. But either way, I'll be back to talk about part 2 of load testing fundamentals on the next episode. Until then, this is Scott Moore. Thank you for watching the SMC Journal podcast. Bye-bye.